He didn't even flinch when she fired him. I was standing outside the conference room holding a folder no one would ever read when I saw it happen through the glass. Mason Drake, khakis too big, shirt ironed like he did it with one hand and a beer, just sitting there, listening while Tessa Langford laid into him like she was auditioning for a reality show. She had that smug MBA smirk, the kind that says, I've never had to Google how to fix a sump pump, but I will absolutely fire the guy who built the pipeline that keeps this company's insides from falling out. I think she expected a scene. HR certainly did. Poor Leah looked like she might throw up into her cardigan. But Mason? That man just leaned forward, calm as an empty bar at last call, and handed over his badge like he'd been waiting for this moment since Y2K. Then he said it. You've got 14 minutes before your primary job shuts down. Just like that. No yelling, no legal threat, no panicked reach for dignity, just protocol. And I swear, Tessa laughed. Thought he was bluffing. Thought he was just another dinosaur we dragged out of the server room, trying to scare the suits before they replaced him with some AI dashboard from a WeWork white paper. If you're even half as hooked as I was standing there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like the video. It helps our team keep digging up stories they'd rather keep buried. Seriously, 97% of you listen without subscribing, and this one's only getting deeper. Because here's the thing no one ever got about Mason Drake. He didn't bluff. He just built things in silence until the silence spoke for itself. I'd only talked to him a few times. Most of us had. He was part of the old Halviks before the Langfords came in with their blazers and buzzwords. Mason didn't do strategy offsites or asynchronous OKR loops. He just made things work. The kind of guy who knew how to reboot an entire supply chain from a command line no one else even had access to. Tessa had been gunning for someone like him since the day she got that fancy Chief Efficiency Officer title. Her whole personality was a walking spreadsheet with delusions of grandeur. She came in like a hurricane, cutting roles, canceling vendor contracts, killing anything that didn't fit into her quarterly cost curve. The funny part? She thought Mason's training programs were a slush fund. I saw the audit she sent around. She flagged line items with names like Resilience Drill 7B and Contingency Layer Simulation, EU Node. Laughed about them at lunch. Probably fake webinars, she said, or some kind of nerdy boys club Mason built to avoid real work. But I'd been in one of those drills, once, by accident. It was 2 years ago. I got looped in when my contractor login triggered a shutdown sequence in the sandbox. Mason pinged me directly, first time ever, and walked me through undoing it. I still remember how calm he was, like a surgeon guiding someone through open heart with kitchen utensils. Afterward, he sent me a one-line message. Now you've seen what failure looks like before it becomes real. And then he deleted the thread. That's what those programs were. Fail-safes, simulations, pressure tests that let Mason see exactly how long the system would survive if someone stupid ever took the wheel and pulled the wrong levers. And now someone had. After he left that day, there was this weird tension in the building, like everyone was trying to figure out if he'd meant it. 14 minutes. What did that even mean? Well, minute 15 came. The lights were still on. Emails still worked. The vending machines didn't spit out fire. So Tessa made her victory lap. Dead weight removed, she called it. Sent a group-wide email about cultural transformation, using Mason's name like a chalk outline in a TED Talk. But somewhere deep in the back end, a countdown had started. And Mason? He didn't go to a bar. Didn't blast a manifesto on LinkedIn. He just walked out of the building like a guy heading to a hardware store, knowing damn well the house he built was about to fall down, because he'd pulled the right screw himself. And the only tool that could fix it, he took that with him. The thing with Tessa was, she never asked questions, just audited answers she didn't understand until they looked like threats. The training programs caught her eye during a Friday expense sweep she forced finance to run. I was in the room when she circled them on the printout, red Sharpie like she was grading a test she couldn't pass. What the hell is red failover 4C? She scoffed. And why are we spending $12,000 a quarter on SimNode refresh cycles? These aren't training programs, they're hobby projects. Legacy waste. Someone from finance, Jonas, I think, started to explain. Something about non-customer facing systems, resilience matrices, internal simulations. Tessa cut him off with that smile she does when she thinks she's 2 steps ahead, but the floor is about to disappear. I want every unbillable expense flagged. We're bleeding margin because dinosaurs like Mason think they're running a doomsday cult in the server basement. Set a session. Monday. Make it formal. She called it a performance correction meeting. Said it was just optics. Document the fallout before the purge. HR nodded. They always nod. But what she didn't know was that I'd already told Mason. It wasn't some big act of loyalty, just instinct. You don't kick a stray dog that's never bitten anyone. You don't corner someone like Mason without wondering why he's been so quiet for so long. I messaged him the moment I saw the agenda. Just a single sentence. Check your Monday 10 a.m. He didn't reply. Not directly. Instead, 2 hours later, I got a calendar invite labeled Field Simulation Prep 2012-2024 Archive Sync Final. No location, just a link to a private file directory. Inside were logs, dozens, hundreds, time-stamped drills, emergency shutdowns, power grid reroute tests, vendor black hole scenarios. It read like a diary from someone whose only job was making sure we'd never live through the headlines we all pretended couldn't happen. None of it was documented in company policy. None of it was billable. But every single line was a blueprint for keeping Halvix running if the worst ever happened. And now, the worst was wearing Louboutin heels and planning a Monday ambush. I went back to the expense report. The ones Tessa had marked as fraudulent were simulations. Everyone, each one titled in his quiet code, red failover meant critical vendor fail. Node refresh was data scrub and reboot prep. Sim Cascade was multi-region failure testing. There was even one labeled Langford Shadow Drill, dated a week after she was hired. He'd planned for her. And I think he always knew it would be internal. Not a cyber attack, not ransomware, not even a flood. Just someone with too much confidence and not enough comprehension. That weekend, Tessa bragged on LinkedIn about modernizing outdated operations and empowering leadership to challenge inertia. She used a photo of a whiteboard she didn't draw on, with 3 post-its. Redundancy, lean, efficiency. I stared at it so long I wanted to scream. She didn't understand what Mason had done because it wasn't in her vocabulary. Resilience doesn't trend. Fail-safes don't get you speaking gigs. And Mason? He didn't argue, didn't push back, just moved like he always had. Quiet, precise, already 10 moves ahead. Monday was coming, and she had no idea what she was cutting into. The glass conference room always felt like a fish tank. Too bright, too clean, too damn performative. Like if you held your breath long enough, the illusion of professionalism would crack and someone would finally admit this place was built on duct tape and inherited ego. Mason was already sitting when I walked past. Arms crossed. Calm. He looked like someone waiting for a bus that was never coming, and maybe hadn't been scheduled in years. Tessa made her entrance 5 minutes late, latte in hand, phone still lit with Slack pings she'd never answer. Her heels clicked like punctuation. Leah from HR followed, pale and twitchy, holding a manila folder like it might bite her. Everyone knew what this was, even Leah, especially Mason. Tessa didn't sit right away. She walked a slow circle around the table as if her power increased the longer you had to watch her exist. Mason, she began, oozing that faux concerned tone people use when they're practicing empathy for performance reviews and eulogies. Thanks for joining. This won't take long. He nodded once, didn't speak. We've reviewed your discretionary spend and there are concerns. Concerns about appropriateness, transparency, and relevance to active projects. I'm sure you understand that in today's operational climate, we need clarity, alignment. That said, we're moving forward with a change. No one blinked. Leah looked at the floor. Mason looked at Tessa like she was a checkout screen on a vending machine. She slid the folder across the table. Your termination is effective immediately. We'll collect your credentials now. It will begin your access off-boarding today. And that was the moment. Mason reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his badge. He held it in his palm like a coin, then set it on the folder with a soft clack. No drama, no parting shot. Then he leaned forward. Not aggressive, not threatening, just measured, like he was reading coordinates off a flight panel. You've got 14 minutes before the primary job shuts down. Tessa blinked. Excuse me? He didn't repeat it, just stood up, adjusted his sleeves, and gave Leah a small nod like he was apologizing for her proximity to stupid. And then he walked out. Tessa laughed. It was awkward, high-pitched, like she knew she'd missed something but didn't want to give it weight. "Was that supposed to be threatening?" she said, flipping the badge over. "I swear these old-school guys think everything is the Matrix." Leah said nothing. She just tucked the folder away like she was handling evidence. Outside the fishbowl, I saw Mason walk past the reception desk, still calm. He didn't take a box, didn't glance back, just out the door, down the hall, and gone. 14 minutes. I watched the clock. Not because I believed anything would happen, because I wanted to. At minute 13, nothing changed. At minute 14, a vendor access ping failed. One of the automated contract syncs didn't go through. Nobody noticed yet. Not really. But something had shifted. A lever had been pulled. A balance tipped. And the only person who could stop what was starting was now somewhere out there. Calm, distant, already done. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd just started the clock. Tessa came back from that meeting like she'd just scored a kill on Wall Street. She did a dramatic little spin into her office chair, sipped her oat milk vanity latte, and said, loud enough for the entire East Quadrant to hear, 1 down, 10 to go. Then she called legal and said, full lockdown on Drake, terminated for expense fraud, no reaccess, ever. She had that smug, post-execution glow only people with too much power and zero consequences ever wear. Her next call was to IT. Reassign all his backlogged workflows to Carson, she said. Carson was a junior analyst who still printed Google Calendar invites and once confused a sandbox for his Spotify playlist folder. Carson looked like someone had handed him the nuclear football wrapped in a TikTok tutorial, but he nodded anyway, and that's when things started to fray. At first, no one noticed. The front-end dashboards were still green. Email still worked. Slack channels hummed with the usual passive-aggressive emoji warfare. But underneath, down in the bone marrow of the system, the responses slowed. It was little things. A vendor portal wouldn't sync. A batch approval queue hung for 45 seconds, then timed out. Legal tried to retrieve an archived contract and got an empty container with a node not found error. They blamed the VPN. By hour 2, procurement hit a wall. Literally. Their entire queue froze. External vendors started emailing, licenses failing authentication, submission loops timing out. A French supplier said their interface had detected replication conflicts and reverted to a cached interface from 2021. Tessa didn't even blink. She just snapped. System refresh, clear cache, restart ops middleware. It obeyed, but the errors didn't stop. One engineer, Carl, bless his over-caffeinated soul, started digging. He pulled log traces from the back-end environments Mason used to own. That's when he saw it. There was a process running. It had been running since exactly 10:17 a.m., the moment Mason dropped his badge on the table. It wasn't labeled anything obvious, just a silent script executing in a sandbox cluster named Train Sim Adreo X6B. Carl pinged the name to his lead. Looks like a legacy compliance simulation, he said, but the behavior's weird. It's affecting live nodes, not virtualized ones. The lead frowned. Simulations don't trigger vendor lockouts. Carl ran a diff. The script wasn't pulling test data. It was targeting active license handshake calls. Region by region, sequentially. They thought it was a test. It wasn't. And the wildest part? It wasn't malicious. There were no external pings, no data exfil, no ransomware, no firewall spikes. Just methodical disengagement, like someone had unplugged the system limb by limb, smiling politely, holding the door open on their way out. Someone messaged Carson asking about the transfer queue for Mason's workflows. He hadn't received anything, because nothing had transferred, because the workflows weren't workflows. They were watchdogs. Mason didn't just run systems. He built the tripwire into their core. Tessa still hadn't figured it out. She was in a solutions lab meeting with her consulting group, giggling over a Canva presentation about change management through generational synergy. Meanwhile, the procurement pipeline, Halvix's lifeline, was dissolving, not crashing, not exploding, dissolving, like a structure slowly realizing the scaffolding is gone. And back in that sandbox, the script kept running. one cycle at a time, each pass shutting down a handshake, one heartbeat closer to flatline. 14 minutes started the timer. 2 hours in, it was clear. This wasn't a simulation anymore. It was around 2:42 p.m. when the first real crack showed in Tessa's tone. She was on a call with Prague, smiling like a TED speaker on Adderall when her screen glitched mid-sentence. Then, her procurement dashboard froze. Tried refreshing. Nothing. She toggled between tabs like that would restart the backbone of the company. 5 minutes later, someone from Bucharest emailed IT directly. All active orders disappeared. We just got a contract expiration notice for a vendor we signed last week. Not a delay, not a hiccup. Gone. That's when Carl, our jittery infrastructure guy, went back into the node logs. He'd been running traces in the background all morning, trying to chase down the source of what he still thought was a misfire. But this time, he went deeper. Old school deep. Legacy script archives, pre-cloud migration. That's where he found it. Buried in a dusty directory labeled System Resilience Phase Archive was a reference map with one line highlighted, Continuity Node 6B, Instructor Override. Only no login prompt, no interface, no trace, just a label with permissions set to null and a digital paper trail that ended in 2017. Carl flagged it to the lead. I think this is where it starts, he said, voice tight. The lead frowned. What's it doing? No idea. I can't even ping it. It's like, it's there, but not there. Shadow partitioned, like it's only awake when something else calls it. And what called it? Carl didn't answer, because at that moment, a fresh wave of emails hit support. Singapore couldn't submit orders. Lisbon's contract dashboard was throwing validation expired flags. And Argentina reported that every regional supplier profile had reset to default permissions. That's when legal got involved. Apparently, Mason's contract templates, yes, those same unreviewed legacy models Tessa wanted replaced, had embedded expiry protocols, not just for the contracts, for the API keys themselves. If the system didn't detect a compliance renewal protocol every 180 days, it voided the key and archived the vendor as inactive. And guess what Tessa had suspended during her efficiency audit? The auto-renew compliance sweep. Said it was non-critical. By now, the entire procurement web was a spaghetti tangle of failed handshakes, orphaned contracts, and regional managers screaming across 4 continents. And every log they pulled, every trail they traced, every last one led to some version of the same cryptic tag. Train Sim 0x6b. The same string Tessa had gleefully redlined in Mason's expense sheet. The same fraudulent simulation she'd mocked in her leadership Slack thread as nerd theater. Her voice changed after that. She wasn't smug anymore. Her sentences got clipped. Her fingers tapped too fast across her desk. She stopped looping in her little McKinsey interns. And when Carl asked if she wanted him to keep digging, she didn't answer, just stared at her screen like it was blinking in Morse code she couldn't decode. The worst part? She still thought she could fix it, still believed the right escalation email would make the universe behave. But the system wasn't broken. It was obeying. And the only person who could explain how or why had left the building with no exit interview, no NDA breach, and no desire to come back. Because Mason hadn't sabotaged anything. He'd just turned off what was his. At exactly 3:11 p.m., Halvix's EU office sent the subject line no one wanted to see. All vendor access terminated. Not paused, not lagging. Terminated. Every single vendor in the European branch had gone dark. No ordering, no status reports, no contract visibility. Sweden's inventory system threw a full kernel panic and reverted to what looked like a 2015 offline mode. A Dutch vendor called the Warsaw office and asked if Halvix had declared bankruptcy. People started pacing. An emergency call was scheduled, level 2 escalation. That meant C-suite only, plus legal and core systems. I wasn't technically allowed to be on the call. But I hovered in the hallway outside the boardroom with 6 others pretending to care about an unplugged printer. Inside, I could hear voices rising through the glass. The CEO, Arthur Langford, Tessa's father-in-law, sounded like a man getting kicked out of his own house by an invisible force. I want answers, he barked. Not excuses. This vendor issue is killing ops. Who owns this? And then someone, I think it was Yanis from IT suggested the unthinkable. We might need to call Mason. A silence so thick you could feel the insulation sweat. Tessa fired back. Absolutely not. He's the reason we're in this mess. He used corporate funds for unauthorized experiments. You want to reward that? Someone tried to interject, something about the difference between misuse and undocumented resilience testing, but Tessa steamrolled it. Do we even know if what he built was compliant or safe? I mean, we don't even understand it. That's when legal broke their silence. They'd been quiet all day, reviewing logs, expense reports, and digital trails like archaeologists at a crime scene. Finally, the associate GC slid a document across the table and said, flatly, he documented everything. Tessa blinked. What? Every expense, every tool, every license, cross-referenced with resilience protocols, continuity frameworks, and disaster recovery models. He didn't misuse funds. He just didn't use your vocabulary. I swear, you could feel the blood drain out of her face, because now it wasn't fraud. It was ignorance. She hadn't uncovered a scandal. She'd canceled the company's safety net because she didn't recognize the net. Back at our desks, the reports kept coming in like aftershocks. Brazil's regional keys were invalid. Munich lost vendor sync history. Tokyo tried rerouting through a North American node, denied. The entire procurement web had been quietly maintained by a lattice of authentication dependencies tied to Mason's resilience architecture. He hadn't centralized it out of ego. He'd done it because nobody else wanted to own it. And now that he was gone, the system didn't fail. It just stepped out with him. By hour 3, you couldn't even blame a hacker. There were no breaches, no anomalies, no ransom notes. Just clean, methodical disengagement. And when you stripped away all the noise, all the panic, all the posturing, what remained was this one truth. She fired the man holding the manual, and then burned the manual too. Somewhere, probably in an apartment too quiet for this world, Mason Drake was sipping something warm, watching the chaos unfold. Not with malice, but with the resigned stillness of a man who'd given every warning in silence, and finally stopped speaking. By 4:08 p.m., the word reversible had lost all meaning. Tessa sat in her glass office with the lights off, back to the window, fingers digging into the armrests like she could squeeze answers from upholstery. Her hair was perfect. Her authority was gone. We were all waiting for her to admit it out loud, but she wouldn't. Not yet. She kept saying, "It's just a system-wide reset. We've survived worse." Like if she repeated the lie enough, it might become operational truth, but the vendor platforms were gone. Not down. Gone. Unmapped. Like they'd never existed. Legal had already stopped talking. They were busy prepping liability drafts and maybe crafting a resignation speech that would throw Mason under the bus with just enough wiggle room to sound sincere. Carl, meanwhile, had gone rogue. He was back in the command logs, scraping timestamps, backtracing every instance of the UX6B signature. That's when he saw something odd. A terminal ID pinging faintly from DC, old, dusty, legacy hardware. Location, basement level 2, hall C, tag, training node, instructor level. It wasn't on the asset registry anymore, decommissioned years ago, probably before Tessa had even married into the circus. Carl stared at the entry for a long time. It was pinging every 6 minutes. Quiet, heartbeat pings. Alive, but sealed. He walked into Tessa's office. She didn't notice at first, just kept mumbling to herself, chewing the inside of her cheek like it owed her money. "There's still a terminal active," Carl said gently. Her head snapped up. "Where?" "DC instructor node. It's legacy, but it's still running something. Might be the core trigger. Might be nothing. But we need access." "Do it," she said. "We don't have the password." Tessa blinked. "What do you mean we don't have the password?" Carl didn't blink. It was Mason's. She stared at him like he'd said the moon was on strike. "We reset everything." "Not that one." "Then override it." "We've tried. It's not tied to our main directory. It's standalone, like it was pulled off the grid on purpose." For the first time since the morning, she looked genuinely afraid. Not of Mason, not of the system, but of what it meant to be truly powerless. Carl hesitated, then added, "I can try to reach him." Tessa's jaw clenched. No, he's not getting the satisfaction. Carl didn't argue, just walked away. 5 minutes later, from a personal device not connected to anything Halvix owned, he sent one line. Is it reversible? He waited. Refresh. Nothing. Refresh. Still nothing. Silence. Meanwhile, the board issued a Level 1 internal crisis alert. Systems command locked. Department heads frozen. External communication embargoed. Down in the DC sublevel, a junior ops guy opened the door to the old terminal room. The lights flickered like something was breathing in there. The machine was alive, yes, but untouchable. The monitor displayed a single status bar. Execution cycle, phase 4-6. No keyboard, no prompt, just progress. Tessa finally came out of her office an hour later, pale and shaking. She looked around like she expected anyone, to tell her this was salvageable. No one did. And the truth settled like concrete. The man she'd fired hadn't built a back door. He'd sealed every door the moment she walked in. The message came in at 5:26 p.m., exactly 6 hours and 9 minutes after Tessa fired Mason. Legal had been trying to reach him for the last hour through every channel they could quietly justify. Old personal email, encrypted Signal account, even LinkedIn, where his profile still listed him as Systems Resilience Halvix Global, like the company itself hadn't noticed he'd left yet. He didn't respond to any of them, until he did. No greeting, no explanation, no signature, just a PDF. File name, last simulation complete, 100% PDF. 1 page, black text, white background, top left timestamp to the minute she handed him the termination letter. At the bottom, a status block. All non-critical systems will remain offline unless operator-level restore is initiated. Integrity verified. SIM complete. That was it. No ask, no leverage, just a final ledger entry. Like he'd been running a quiet experiment for a decade, and this was the moment he closed the lab book and turned off the lights. Legal forwarded it to the board within minutes. At 5:51, the full emergency session began. Virtual, encrypted, with a live note-taker redacting in real time. I saw the invite flash across the top tier's calendars like a bomb warning. Arthur Langford didn't say a word for the first 30 minutes. He just sat there, elbows on the table, hands pressed together in front of his lips like he was praying Mason would suddenly appear and explain what they'd done wrong in words a CEO could understand. Tessa? She didn't speak at all. She stared at her own reflection in the laptop screen like maybe if she stayed still long enough, it would blink and tell her she hadn't wrecked the one man in the company who knew how to keep it breathing. The CTO tried to run through a status report, but even he was tripping over the numbers. Regions were slowly coming back online. South America first, then South Korea, then one quiet node in Western Canada, but only partially. Like a glacier unfreezing under specific conditions. Controlled, selective, not all at once, not everything. Just what Mason had chosen to re-engage. Vendor syncs resumed, some of them. Contractual permissions reset, some of them. The sandbox still pulsed in the background, but now it was different. The logs read, final phase, complete, transition active, like it was letting go, on his schedule. One by one, the functions flickered back to life. Procurement dashboards, compliance modules, authentication keys. But not everything. Some things stayed dark. Legacy components no one remembered how to access. Cost-saving features Tessa had bragged about sunsetting during her Q1 fireside chat. Those weren't coming back. The board wanted to know why, how, what risk remained. But the only answer was balance. This wasn't revenge. There was no ransom, no message scrawled in code, no digital signature in the firewall logs. This was equilibrium. Mason hadn't punished anyone. He'd just let gravity do its job. And now, in the absence of his presence, the company he'd quietly held together was being asked to stand on its own. Some pieces would, some wouldn't. But the silence he left behind, it said everything. The room was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of bergamot and solder flux, like someone had once tried to make peace with chaos using both tea and circuit boards. Mason sat at a table that looked secondhand, chipped at the corners, one leg propped up with an old manual labeled Adaptive Continuity for Enterprise Networks, worn, bookmarked, lived in. Steam curled from the mug in front of him as the dashboard on his laptop lit up in soft greens and golds. Region by region, status pings returned with that familiar chirp that used to echo across Halvik's subfloor at 3 a.m. on his shift. Only now, the sounds felt distant, faded, like an old song that used to matter. North America, partial restore. EU core, stable. Asia Pacific, degraded, but alive. He sipped his tea, not watching the reload as much as witnessing it. Like a man confirming a fire had burned itself out the exact way he'd mapped the accelerant. A thumb drive sat beside the keyboard. Matte black. No label, no cap. The kind you couldn't buy in stores anymore. Too secure, too final. He picked it up, plugged it in, and waited. The system blinked, almost like it hesitated, like it knew what this meant. On screen, access level. Instructor override. He opened the root folder. One file. Halvik's. Continuity master.key. He didn't flinch, didn't double check, just dragged it to a small terminal window, typed 6 keystrokes, and hit return. A soft chime. The file vanished. The screen faded to black, not crashed, just off. Done. He closed the laptop with a click that echoed a little too loudly in the quiet room. Outside, it was raining in that way that makes you believe the world's trying to wash something away, not cleanse it. Just move it downstream. A phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Short message. We heard what happened. Quiet genius, they said. Want to chat? He didn't respond. Not right away. He looked out the window for a long time, watching the lights ripple on the wet pavement like code with no errors left. Then, slowly, he typed. Tell her it wasn't personal, just protocol. And then he shut the phone off too.